The Grim Drive podcast explores mental health through the lens of professional sports and athletes. Pro athletes come forward more and more with stories about their mental health journey, what they have endured, and how they managed to push through, reflecting a mental health stigma that continues to be reduced. Pro athletes also leverage mindset to achieve peak performance, as well as representing and often driving elements of popular culture through the use of social media, technology, and personal branding. This places athletes front and center as role models for people of all ages, giving them a platform to reach many and deliver important information, including information about mental health. Welcome to the Grim Drive podcast. My name is Jotham Busfield, here with Jon Cunha. As always, today we'll be discussing Simone Biles and mental fitness. So Simone Biles is one of those athletes, John, where I feel like I kind of remember, there's only a few that reached this level, but I kind of remember where I was when I think it was the 2016 Rio Olympics. Yeah. But you kind of remember where you were when you watched this athlete. You remember like kind of the feeling or the emotion that was, created by them and their performance, because they're so good at what they do and they're so much farther above their competition that it's kind of, you kind of laugh at it. You almost feel bad for the people they're competing against because it's just like, it wasn't even close. I think for her, I want to say they've even maybe outlawed, I thought I read somewhere that they outlawed certain moves in gymnastics because only she could do them. I don't know if anyone else has reached that level, so she might be like the top of the top. I know a few other athletes kind of come to mind when it comes to that level of performance. Obviously, Tiger Woods is probably one of them. Serena Williams, without a doubt. Michael Jordan. I would say Tom Brady. I'm a little bit biased, as are you.
I think that case is fair, closed. I think it's fair at this point. Yeah.
Some people might say Brady's like more body of work than like any one game where he was that much above his comp. Maybe, but again, I think that
something to be said about that.
That position's a little bit different. Wayne Gretzky comes to mind for me, although I think people have kind of swept that name under the rug for some reason in the last few years.
Go check out his statistics because they're wild.
It's insane.
They're insane.
And if you watched highlights of him, it was clear that he was so much better than the people around him.
For sure.
It wasn't even funny. So, and then I don't know much about soccer, but I'd say, Messi is probably somebody who comes to mind.
Yeah, and I do have to just strongly disagree. And for all my friends who know me, know that I'm a huge Cristiano Ronaldo fan.
I know which one to go with on
far
that one.
Superior
I had a feeling.
Lionel Messi. Okay. Lionel Messi, if you're listening, we love you and you're a great player. But yeah,
don't burn bridges. Okay,
had to make sure I made that comment.
So yeah, I wasn't sure which soccer player or football player, I guess you could say, to go with on that one, but Ronaldo's definitely up there as well, where they both kind of reach that level where you watch them play and it's just kind of comical because they're so much better.
So much better than everybody else. Yeah.
So Simone Biles definitely reaches that level for me. And in the 2016 Olympics, I remember watching her just absolutely crush the competition. Just quick bio on her. She's an American gymnast. Most people know that, but she's got a combined total of 30 Olympic and World Championship medals. She's the most decorated American gymnast of all time. A few facts about Simone Biles that we found kind of interesting. She's only 23 years old. And on the one hand, I say only 23. I didn't know this, but I guess for a gymnast, that's extremely old. I didn't know that. I thought like maybe mid-20s is when you start to get old as a gymnast, but I guess it's like late teens is when you they consider you sort of like phasing out because you're too old. Yeah. Which is kind of crazy in my opinion. So she's only 23 years old. She was adopted by her maternal grandfather after being in foster care when she was much, much younger. She holds Belizean citizenship through her mother and refers to that country as her second home. And she's got a French bulldog named, I think it's Lilo. If it's Lilo, forgive me, Simone. You got to shout out, props to the dog. We love dogs around here. Yeah. So that we always try to mention, for the athletes that we cover and we discuss, we always try to mention which charity or charitable organization they sort of either, created, run, support, do things for, partner with, that kind of thing. So for her, it's mattress firm fosterkids.org. So we're going to put that link in the show notes as always. And they help support foster children nationwide, which is a really important mission. So we want to make sure we call that out in a good way. So in terms of takeaways, John, I'm going to kick it to you with regard to Simone Biles, her experience, what she's discussed about mental fitness, mental health. What are some of your takeaways?
Yeah, first, just two additional things that I found about her that I thought were particularly interesting is that she's the first gymnast, male or female, to win a world's medal in every single event.
Oh, wow.
In gymnastics, which I had no idea.
Yeah.
She's the first person ever to do that. And she's also the first African-American all-around world champion, or female African-American all-world champion, which I thought was just fascinating.
Yeah, that's amazing.
One of my biggest takeaways was this was a fun dive into her history, because she's just like this. We mentioned she's on the Mount Rushmore of just those types of athletes that just are far above everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the biggest things that stood out for me, she did a master class, and she called it sort of like her 7 steps for mental fitness, or 7 steps for success and things like that. And I thought that was one of the things that really stood out to me.
Yeah, 7 tips on performance and anxiety.
Performance anxiety,
Yep.
right. And she broke it down, and sort of she talked about fundamentals, every new opportunity, new game, new opportunity, remembering her training, visualize things, music she talked about, which I'll get into in just a minute, and then confidence. And those really stood out to me because those were really, really good concrete sort of pillars to working on both performance anxiety, but also just performance in general.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when she talks about fundamentals, she really is talking about like the stuff you start learning day one in gymnastics, and the importance of all those different things, and staying sort of grounded in the process
Okay.
and the foundation.
Yeah.
I think that's really something that was important for her to like start with, because that is, when you look at these steps, I see it as like building of a house, and fundamentals is the foundation for that. And then new game, new opportunity. I think this is something that I see a lot of times with athletes of sort of they carry baggage from either previous performances, and it can influence new ones. So you had a bad game, mentality into that might be, I had a bad game last game, I'm going to have a bad game this game, and it just interferes.
That
so
carries over, like a snowball effect.
Yeah, exactly. And so for her talking about like that happened, I'm here now, and really being able to switch gears and compartmentalize, I thought was really important, and a really good technique. And then again, remembering her training. And I think this kind of relates a little bit to visualization too, which I'm going to get to next. But remembering her training was a lot about, reminding herself. She talks a lot about this in the masterclass, about remembering like she's done this a million times in practice,
Mm-hmm.
right? So she's been able to like physically do what she's about to go do, and there is literally no different, other than maybe like a few million people watching on TV.
Mm-hmm.
But that really is the only difference. But the things that she's asking from her body to be able to do, she's already done that. And so I thought that was a thing, and that kind of really ties into visualization, because she talks about visualizations a lot, and in a way that I think there's a lot of misconceptions about visualization training, but I think the way that she outlined it was really perfect. Sort of like visualize yourself waking up, having a great morning, visualize the steps you want to go through, visualize yourself seeing yourself execute the things you want to be doing on the beam or the bar or the mat or wherever, and being as specific as possible. And she even talks about, which I think this is usually the missing piece with visualizations, she talks about, if you can make it, the more real you make it in your mind, the easier it is when you're in live space, or when you're like actually there performing to do the activity. You've sort of like convinced your brain you've already done this before, and it's no different. You just got to kind of hit replay. I thought those were really great.
Yeah,
starters.
I want to expound on that a little bit, because that is one thing that I don't know about you. I know when I've worked with athletes, I haven't worked with athletes as much as you have, but when I've worked with athletes in the past, that's the one thing that they always, I think, roll their eyes at the most, is like, why would I spend time envisioning in my head doing things well? What is that going to do?
Mm-hmm.
And it always catches me off guard. But then, like, usually I think when you explain that they're doing that anyway, whether they admit it or not, usually in a negative direction, it starts to click and make more sense, because I think it is extremely helpful. Like going through that visualization process where you actually envision, I like to try to encourage clients to like envision, not just envision, I would say use all the senses. You know, what are you seeing? What does it smell like in the gym if that's where you are? What does it look like? What does it sound like? What does it feel like? And really really get all the senses engaged in your visualization so that it becomes more real. I think going through those mental reps are just I don't know if they're just as helpful as the physical. I don't know how you would characterize it, but they're obviously extremely important. How would you weigh the impact of visualization, positive or negative, versus intentional practice in a physical sense and being there?
I'd say they're as important,
Okay.
right? I think that they're both equal. And I think when you use mental reps, and I think when you start talking to athletes from like using language like that, like you can only get so many physical reps in things. Your body can only sustain a certain amount. Your brain can sustain more.
Yeah.
Again, there's a limit to it as well, just like there is for your like your body. But that I would say they're just as. I mean, they're just as important. And when I, talking to athletes, you're right. This is always the one that I get the eye roll. The breath training and visualizations are the hardest conversations to have with athletes, because they always are just like, how is this possibly going to work?
Yeah.
And then you start actually getting some buy-in when they start practicing it and doing it. And I think what you brought up is really important when you start to incorporate, and this is what Simone Biles talks about a lot, was like, if you can incorporate your all 5 senses into what's going on, like I said, you convince yourself that you're in that space. And it's just more individual training. And the one thing that, again, that I always go back to when I get that initial eye roll from visualization is that all the people that we talked about at the beginning of this episode, every single one of them uses visualization in their training. And I'll talk about the importance of doing it. Mm-hmm. So if we're looking for things that are for commonality across practices for some of the best athletes that have ever done their sport, visualization is a part of that. So if it's good enough for Tom Brady, Simone Biles, Lionel Messi, Wayne, I don't know about Wayne Gretzky, see if he used those pieces as well, but like, if it's good enough for them, what is it that's so different about you that you can't find benefit from trying to do these things? And oftentimes we've talked about this in previous episode, that like it seems too easy to be effective, so I'm just going to dismiss that it's going to work. And then you get buy-in, you get consistency, and they're like, whoa, my performance has dramatically shifted.
Yeah, and I think this is where there's probably still, I don't want to say necessarily that these young athletes, when they roll their eyes at this, that they're like, having a stigma against it. But I do think that, mental performance training and things like that is still second guessed compared to physical, right? If you took a young athlete and you showed them 10 physical practice approaches that athletes in their sport were doing, who are the top of their sport, they would do those physical movements in a second, right? Yeah. Wouldn't even think twice. To be like, that's what Tom Brady does. That's what Michael Jordan does. Boom, I'll do it. Like, just get me to the place where I can. But with the mental visualizations, they just don't look at it the same way. And it's interesting. I think it's starting to change. I think possibly it's because physical things, when you're doing them, you can feel them more readily. You can maybe see the results a little bit quicker, or in with your eyes, more than just like when you're visualizing, it's a little bit more of a trust that has to happen for you to wait and see the effect that has.
Yeah, and the way that I kind of help to describe it too with the buy-in, because it takes time for this to be like really effective, and it is really difficult in the beginning when you're starting visualization training. And I always look for people who come in. I'm like, hey, how did it go? I'm like, it was great. It was awesome. I did it great. And I always am like, this was your first time doing it. Like, I have apprehension from the people who come in and tell me like it went perfectly. Because that's not the typical. That's not usually the typical process.
A red flag.
That's a red flag for me.
Yeah. Like they may be like sugarcoating it a little bit, or
maybe, or just like trying to rush the process and moving forward and not really doing like really grinding through it, because that's kind of what it is, at least in the beginning. I look for the people who are like, that sucked. That was so hard. I couldn't get it right. Something, that's typically the response that I get from people
meditation,
who are like really
you
going
get that
through
a lot too when they
same
first start.
thing. Yep, exactly. So but again, same thing with like if you're going to the gym, right, to train and to build muscle, let's say, right, and you go and you do bicep curls for one day, you go home, you don't have massive biceps, right? You have to go consistently to the gym. I mean, it literally is the exact same process.
So that's a good point, because I think that's another element of where, mental training is different in terms of how people look at it, or their perspective towards like keeping an open mind towards it. I think they expect instant gratification more on average, not everybody, but I think people in general, when they're going to do meditation or breath work or visualization, they want to see the results tomorrow for some reason. Whereas when they're going to work out, they want to get better quick, but they don't expect to such a high degree that it's going to change overnight. Yeah. Whereas with meditation, especially, it's like you get a person does it once, they're like, I didn't notice a difference. Like, well, you got to do it every day for many months, probably most people would say years, to really see the gradual results. So yeah,
exactly. So that was my big tangent on visualization. But the next one that she gets into, she talks a lot about the use of music in like her training as a way to kind of like bring her into the zone and get her into the zone. And I have sort of like a mixed conversation on music, because for that purpose, for someone who's already doing the back end mental fitness training, like doing the visualizations, she's cultivating her confidence, which we're going to get into in a minute.
Yep.
She works on her fundamentals. She's sort of like training her mind leading up to that. Having music as a vehicle to get you like that extra push to kind of like get the heart rate up and get you in the zone, I think it works for her. Obviously, yeah. I'm not going to sit here and say it's not effective for someone who's the most decorated ever. The issue that I sometimes run into with music is that, you know, when you're listening to music, typically like the heart rate goes up, the beat of the song matches the heart rhythm, and you kind of you get yourself like energized a little bit. And then if you're not doing the back end training, when you remove the music, you remove that stimulus, and all the activity kind of decreases without it.
So it's kind of like the scaffold or the structure to which you kind of attached your rhythm and your practice is now been removed. And
Been removed.
Gone. Okay.
Yeah. And then and it also too, like music also it can be an effective distracting tool, to kind of like, which I think contributes to getting yourself in the zone. And then when you remove that, all those distractions, if you're not mentally fit, come flooding back and immediately interfere back with the work. So I think that, or the performance. So I think that it's really, really effective. It can be a really effective tool. And you see many athletes doing their warm-ups with headphones in and stuff like that. I think that's great. But I think the missing piece is that if it's the be-all, end-all for how you work that, there might be some problems that can kind of come up in your performances sort of leading forward if you're not sort of doing the back-end work. Yeah,
that's interesting, because it makes me think of the Tiger Woods documentary, because one of the parts of the Tiger Woods documentary was his father, like when he was growing up, and his father was obviously getting him onto the golf course and acclimating him to the game and really, scaling him up quick from a young age. One of the things he would do, which we know, like golf is a game where silence is sort of expected. And, in terms of like maintaining decorum, you're not supposed to make noises. And even when it's a large crowd, they're supposed to stay silent, and people get thrown out if they make noises.
Right.
He would walk past Tiger when he was in his backswing, and he would say little things, or he would throw little things, and he would do it. It just, to me, that makes me think of like almost the opposite. Like you're not, he almost made sure that he wasn't relying on silence as the backdrop to his fluid swing motion and focus.
Yep.
He was acclimating him to like having things kind of come out of nowhere, and that was his norm, so that when that stuff happened on the course, he was able to stay in the flow state.
All ready to go. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's interesting.
Yeah.
And the last piece that she talks a great deal about this. I encourage everybody to go back and do the master. It was pretty amazing. Just to listen to her speak. But she talks a lot about confidence and like her understanding of sort of, this is something that is cultivated, it's created. It's not just, you don't just have it or you don't. It takes time and effort to work on building confidence and sustaining confidence. And confidence is one of those things that kind of ebbs and flows. It's not just, you would like it to be this sustained thing, but there are dips in confidence when things happen. And she talks a lot about, and I think that if you are able to sort of follow through with much of the stuff she talked about, confidence is sort of the end result of all of the work that you're putting into doing that type of stuff. And it plays into visualizations. If you're doing visualizations, and let's use the gymnastics piece, you're doing a beam exercise, and you keep, you're doing a visualization, you keep falling off in your head, right? That might speak to a lack of confidence that you're able to actually do what you're looking to do. And so visualizations can build that confidence up. But if you can't believe in yourself enough to be able to do those things, it's obviously going to completely interfere with your ability to go out there and perform the way that you want to. And I think that the more confidence that you can continue to build and work on, the better. And I think that doing a lot of these different things is a good way to go about that. But when doubt creeps in, if you're not prepared to deal with that, that's when things can start to spiral in performance. And then your confidence, then that critic takes over. Oh, you're no good. You're not gonna do well. You're gonna lose. Everyone's looking at you. This is terrible. This is going downhill fast. And confidence can kind of, if you have a good, strong confidence, can be like, no, shut up. I'm good. I got this. Right. But that takes work to be able to have that internal conversation with yourself.
Yeah. And I think the one thing you mentioned earlier that I think ties into this is that concept of short memory. And I think like I try to work on athletes with this, like when you're in the moment, like you have to be able to let go of something very quick. If you make a mistake, it's like a mental bookmark, right? You're going to come back to that later. Because I think mentally, when we talk about mental toughness, I think mentally tough people and athletes, they don't ignore emotion. It's not just about being stoic and not allowing something to affect you at all, and then you pretend like everything's fine. It's about being able to pick and choose when you address emotion. That's, to me, what makes somebody mentally tough, is that they can have something happen in a moment, and they can bookmark it for later, snap back, short memory, let that go, maintain or regain focus in the moment. And then later on, after, especially with sports, after the game is over or the gymnastics meet is over, then you revisit what happened. And she even talks about journaling. So I think something she's done for a long time, where you revisit mentally and emotionally what was happening in that moment. How did that affect me? How does it affect me now? So I think that's a misconception, I think, about mental toughness, is that, these athletes are just, they have this wall up that's impenetrable. And I don't think that's how it works. I think they just wait until later to kind of address it and get into it. And so the short memory thing definitely ties into this. I also think you mentioned something earlier with the confidence piece, which is, that it has to be worked on and practiced. I think a lot of people have the order of operations backwards on this, right? They think that if I'm worthy of being confident or feeling confident, then I would feel that way. Right. So because I don't, that must mean I'm just not worthy of that. And I don't think that's the case. Right? We work with clients on this where it's like confidence is not something you're necessarily born with or that you're just going to have. You have to, believe that you deserve it and then work on cultivating it. Like you say, I love that term, cultivating confidence, because it's about, recognizing that it's not just going to fall out of the sky. You have to do different things that will, gradually boost it up. And there are going to be life events that take you down a peg or two from time to time. Yep. And it's good to work on your mental fitness in other ways to help you be more resilient and guard against like massive dips when those life things happen, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So anything else on that 7 tips for performance anxiety?
No, honestly, that was, I always do, but I would encourage anybody to kind of go back and like learn her story. And there's certainly some things that we won't have time to touch on that was a big impact for her, but we, that was the big one that pertained to sort of like obviously to mental fitness and what the topic for today, that just seemed like, you hear other athletes talking about like their systems or their ways or sort of how they break things down. And this one just really flowed well. And I thought was just really, really put together really, really well.
Yeah. So. Yeah. And she's so well spoken. I mean, it reminds me of like, a lot of NBA athletes, remind me of this too, where it's like, they're so young. They come into the league at like, 19 sometimes, 20, 21. And especially in the last decade, I feel like they've become more and more polished around how to handle the media, how to talk about, the game, about themselves, how to develop a brand. Like these are things where, dude, if you had talked to me when I was 23, it wouldn't have looked very pretty. Like I think so. These athletes, the fact that they can be so well spoken and handle the stress that they do is really impressive to me. And that came through with her. So we talked about when it comes to confidence, how you have to cultivate it and you have to do other things to guard against life events that are going to happen that may, diminish your confidence. They may create difficult emotions. They may lead to mental health issues. She's been through quite a bit. I mean, she's been through, difficult transitions in life, obviously being adopted and being in foster care for a time period. Performing at a high level in competition is its own difficult thing to deal with at a young age. She's been through trauma. So I think one thing that stood out to me is, how she talked about, with 2020, the pandemic and the Tokyo postponement, that was really devastating to her. I mean, she was like in the best shape of her life. I think it was like a grieving process that she had to go through because she was planning on competing in Tokyo and then retiring. Right. And now I think she had to make that decision of like, all right, what do I do here? Do I, first it's like I let myself feel this grief and this loss. And then I think she had to figure out, do I want to train for another year and go do it, which she ultimately is going to do, which is pretty cool. Yeah. But that's to me, where it sounds like something clicked about mental fitness for her, right? And she even has a quote where she said, "I've spent so much time working on my physical self. I've tried to use this time to focus on my mental well-being." She says, "I've focused a lot on my self-care, on feeding my mind with lots of positive thoughts." She also said, because this kind of relates, she said, taking time for myself is so important. I'm a worrier and I try to take care of others before myself. So taking time to myself has been really nice. And I think I'll be taking that into 2021. I thought that was really cool because, one, she recognizes that being proactive with this kind of thing is really important and you get what you put in. If you're proactive with mental fitness and you keep yourself in a good place with self-care, when life events happen, because they're going to, you're less likely to be really adversely impacted by that. Yep. And then the other thing that relates, because we've talked about this a lot, is how when you care about people and you love people, it doesn't mean you always have to put those people sky high above you. Like if you really care about them,
Mm-hmm.
you got to put yourself on the same plane,
Right.
Because and parents, this relates to parenting a lot, because I think parents often put their kids first, and we've discussed that in the past. And it's good to put your kid first, but you have to put your own needs up there at the same level, because that will actually allow you to be the best parent you can
Right.
be.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of gets us into, mental fitness for her, because obviously she's taken that more seriously. A couple things that stood out, and we're going to get into this in the mental fitness section a little bit, but she kind of gets into what things need to be removed for mental fitness and what things need to be added. And I guess you could always it's tomato on that kind of thing, because usually when you're adding something, you're also taking something out that's maybe on the negative version of that. But she talks about avoiding social media before competition, which I think is really cool, because you're getting that out of your life. That's a mental fitness step. You're protecting yourself by saying, I'm not going to surround myself with all this negativity and that kind of thing. I'm going to get into more of a focused state by getting away from that. And she also surrounds herself with people she loves who bring good vibes to her life, which on the flip side is she's not surrounding herself with negative people.
Right.
I think that's a decision people sometimes struggle with, is like, for your own mental fitness, it's okay to look at like, who are the people in your life that don't treat you fairly or are unhealthy or toxic for you, and take steps to not be around those people. I think every person has the right to make that decision if they think that that's required.
Mm-hmm.
And then she's got stuff that she puts in, just kind of go down the list real quick. I mean, she takes things one day at a time. So in terms of that's like mindset, attitude, she writes down goals and she journals. She had mentioned taking a stand and speaking up. I think that's one thing she seems to be doing more in the last year plus, especially with, social justice and things like that, is like really vocalizing her beliefs and her views. She talks about separating work from non-work. And this makes me think of an analogy that you use, or a metaphor that you use, John, which is, she says, what fills your tank, quote unquote. Mm-hmm. I think you, correct me if I'm wrong, you use the what fills up your bucket. Is that the one that you use with clients? So I've tried to use that too, because I think that's really important. You have to look at, what are the things that are, either filling up my bucket in a good way or depleting it, right? Mm-hmm. And you can go the reverse kind of. Sometimes with clients, I'll say like, hey, sometimes the bucket needs to be emptied. The bucket of stress needs to be emptied. What are the strategies you use that actually empty the bucket periodically instead of having it spill over all over the floor? Mm-hmm. And what are the things that are negative in your life that kind of keep adding water, right? So you can kind of go either way with the metaphor.
Yeah.
But I think that was really cool, because she is really kind of, she clearly understands herself, and there's a level of self-awareness there. And I think that factors into her mental fitness. Mm-hmm. She talks about therapy being really important. Did you see that at all?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's really important that this is just more of a piece. I think that we talk, you and I talk about this all the time, about like the ability to sort of work with a therapist who has like the clinical understanding of what is going on, so that all of the things that she does in terms of like to make herself mental fit are available to her.
Yeah.
And, this isn't just for her, this is for everybody. If you are, in a place that you need clinical like help from somebody to balance yourself out, the performance stuff really isn't going to be that effective at all.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm biased, but in my opinion and experience, the people that I've worked with, the athletes that I've worked with, sometimes we come in and talk about performance. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes we're talking about something that has nothing to do with the sport at all. Yeah. And until they can get to the point of addressing those needs and moving on, then the performance stuff becomes much more of a conversation and much more of they're actually able to take on the things that we're talking about and put them into practice. But if there are things and hindrances and barriers in the way, from like a clinical standpoint, they're not going to be able to get that stuff done. And I think her talking about doing those things sort of in conjunction is where the conversation needs to go and continue to go, because that is the most effective way to get this stuff done.
Yeah, and it's the analogy or the metaphor I like to use is like a dandelion, and I'll say this to clients, where it's like if you're just doing surface level things, and especially like mental performance only with regard to like being on the court or on the mat or that kind of thing, you're just kind of cutting off the top of the weed, right? You're not really getting at the root. You're not pulling that out to really understand what is causing some of the issues. And if you don't address the stuff that has really kind of comes from general life and meanders into the sporting athlete world, you're not getting the full picture. And I think sounds like that's what you're kind of touching on, is that you have to be working on both.
Yeah. And I mean, oftentimes the stuff that interferes with your performance isn't like a performance issue.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
Most of the time it's not.
Yeah.
And if you're just sort of like performance, you're not really treating. You're not really helping.
And even if you are, I think it kind of invalidates the athlete as a person. It's
Right.
like, and I think I've heard athletes speak to this, like whether it's the Michael Phelps episode or other episodes we've done where they feel like, yeah, like the sports psychology stuff, they're trying to get, I'm a tool that they're using, and they're trying to sharpen me as a tool for that purpose.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't really care about me as an individual, as a person. So I think
Mm-hmm.
it has the effect of intentionally, whether the sports psychologist, that kind of thing, even means to do that or not.
No,
they
probably
don't.
not. No,
sure
of
they
course.
don't.
Right.
But it leads to that effect of them feeling like, well, they only care if I do what I need to, like on where I'm supposed to as an athlete. That like it just makes them feel invalidated as a person, which I think is going to compound some of the issues that are already happening.
Right.
Because you need to give yourself validation. You need to have other people in your life give you validation to start the healing process. And that to me is what kind of stands out about her when she talks about therapy, because she calls it her safe spot, I think, or safe place where she can get out negativity, hear herself talk, and she knows for a fact it's confidential. I think that is something that has to be said about therapy, is that, you know, it's very, very important to have people in your life, friends and family, that you go to for support. At the same time, they have their own agendas sometimes, and it's not a one-way street, right? It's a two-way street with family members and friends, which is a good thing. I think in its own way, it's very, very important. With the therapist, you know that person is really there to listen to you and to support you. That's their main job, right? And there is confidentiality, so you know it's not going to go anywhere outside of that. So therapy is not for everybody, but I think that's an important reason to consider it for a lot of people.
Yeah, I also think that sometimes, and this is what I talk about with people too, is that sometimes it's nice to have someone who's not in your sphere, right?
Yeah.
Who has no
Impartial.
objective opinion, is just sort of there to listen and to provide guidance and to provide some some strategies or some things to sort of address. But you know, even with support networks of people around you, the information you could pass, it will influence potentially the environment. And so having a separate space to be able to like go and talk and get that stuff out initially, to process, to think about, to be, have someone reflect that back is invaluable for this type of stuff. And so certainly not saying like support networks are useless. That's not what we're saying. Yeah. But having a therapist who's impartial to everything, just sort of there as a confidential space to go to is so huge.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So a couple other takeaways I had, I think we use Simone Biles as an example in our ADHD and 8 program of like athletes or successful people with ADHD. I think it's really key for young people, especially who have ADHD, to know that there are so many others out there that have it, that are really successful, top of their field. It does not mean you're stupid. Usually people with ADHD are extremely intelligent. And so I want to mention that because I think that's an example we give for people, because they often see that name and they're like, oh, I didn't know she had ADHD. Right. That makes me feel like I could do like a lot of different things. Yep. And she also spends 7 to 8 hours in the gym every day, which kind of stood out to me. Like, is that, unbelievable. I can't imagine doing that. So athletes, what they dedicate, I'm sure you could kind of relate to this a little bit more than I could based on the track pass, but it's really impressive to dedicate that much time. So we're going to switch a little bit to the topic of mental fitness. You had touched on a little bit, Jon, in terms of the importance when it comes to mental fitness of really treating the whole person, not just the athlete in the person. And crossing that line and getting both sides of that. And that's something I think you in particular do extremely well. In the program you developed for Rise and Tread focuses on both, right? It focuses on performance mindset and recovery, but it really focuses on the whole person and looking at what are the elements and the areas of their life that have nothing to do with athletics, right, and yet clearly are affecting them as a person and bleeding in and affecting them as an athlete. And I think that's something that we don't really see happening with a lot of other athletes out there in terms of the work that they're doing. We see a lot of performance coaches, sports psychologists on staff, but they largely, I think, now I'm not in that realm, so I don't know for sure, but the feedback I think we've gotten is that they largely focus on just the performance piece, right? And they're hired by the team, which I do think relates to trust in terms of trust. From the trust and buy-in from the athlete to know that what they're working on or what they say is going to stay there. That's not always a guarantee, I think. Now, maybe the team would say it is, but is the athlete going to believe that? Right,
exactly. And the other thing, too, is that like finding the right fit is really important. And if you're sort of like, this is your option.
This is your person.
This is your person, right? Yeah. It's like, well, I didn't vibe well with that person at all, and now you're being forced to talk. I think absolutely it speaks to trust, because it's like, is this information truly confidential? Right. Because I'm especially for pro athletes, I'm a monetary value, at one point to these teams. And then am I just a tool being used and sharpened to sort of serve a purpose, but no real interest in like actually serving what I need. I think it's a big barrier. And you hear a lot of athletes talk about like, oh yeah, I wouldn't go talk to my sports, or like I had a meeting with them, I was like, I never went back, and or I never did this or whatever. It's sort of like dismissive. And I think that's part of the process of why.
I agree. And ironically, I would guess, now I can't speak for every like sports psychologist, mental health professional that's staffed with a professional team, but I would guess if they knew that, they would kind of be appalled, not mad at the athlete, but just like would feel hurt that the athlete couldn't trust them, because mental health professionals, they really have an ethics behind what they do. And they take an oath in terms of like making sure that they're serving the client and that they maintain confidentiality. It often relates to their license that they hold. So that's really important. I don't think it's the mental health professionals that have, given the vibe to athletes that they're not trustworthy. I think it's actually the past when it comes to the physical doctors on the team. I think, especially in like pro sports like the NFL and things like that, there's been tons of NFL athletes, and probably in other sports too, where the team doctor, is hired by the team, and their goal is to really look out for the organization too. And you can't really have that, but you got to have the person's health be the priority. And I think in the past, some players have been burned, getting an opinion from a team doctor, and then going to get maybe smart enough to go get a second opinion, realizing like, oh, wow, maybe this doctor didn't have my best interest in mind, because they're paid a ton of money by the team and they have a stake in that. So I think that's probably led to a little bit of the mistrust. Yeah. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I think unfortunately you've seen examples of it, and then that's where you base your judgments off of previous experiences. So I definitely agree.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's something where I hope moving forward, athletes more and more kind of get access to, whether it's a broader team on staff or maybe just people close by that aren't on staff that they can trust and work with on this kind of thing, that know how to blend the mental fitness, mental health side with, with some of the performance mindset stuff.
Yeah, and one thing I want to add about is the reason why it's so important to blend and not just focus on performance is that there'll be a time in every single athlete's life, maybe Tom Brady will figure out a way to do it, but that sports comes to an end for them, that they don't
That's never going to happen, by the way. So
it's never going to happen. Well, it will. If he comes back to the Patriots, it never will. He'll play forever, but if he keeps playing with the Bucs, then he can retire. But eventually that goes away. Yeah. That performance piece, so if you are only supporting an athlete or a person as an athlete and performance, when that goes away, what do they have? And that's one of the biggest things that I see. And I with the program, I work with a lot of recovering athletes who are going through injury, and the process is almost identical for all of them. Maybe they leaned too heavily on the performance or on their sport, and then they got removed, and their confidence is completely gone because all of their confidence was generated from their performance and their play. And then when they can't do that anymore, what are they? And part of the benefit of combining performance with the clinical stuff is that there's a lot of clinical work that can be done where you can generate confidence and cultivate confidence that has nothing to do with you as an athlete.
But is going to help you.
But is going to help you. And that's why the combination of both of them is so huge. And we don't see it anywhere. And that's why we need to be doing more of this work just on a global stage of being able to combine both these things, because in terms of helping people, not just an athlete, helping people, this is a more effective way of doing that.
Absolutely. Which ironically will make them a better athlete. So again, we've talked about this so many times, but the teams actually care about that. Right. And that is their only care, because it's like bottom line, business owner, whatever.
Yep.
Fine. If you only want to care about that, like that still is worth doing on this side to balance these, because it will make them a better athlete, make them happier and more functional.
Right. The end goal is downside. They're going to be a stronger person and a stronger athlete. Yeah. So I don't know. I don't see why there would be why you wouldn't do it.
Yeah. I agree. And it's interesting because you bring up, you've talked a lot about in this episode and in the past about cultivating confidence, about purpose development, about passions, right? And I think I would guess you do that work with athletes too, where you're not just waiting for them to retire. You're also working on planting those seeds about passions and purpose development outside of the game, and cultivating confidence in a non-athletic sense, because I would guess that I'm going to kick it to you, but I would guess that positions them not only to be a great athlete continuously moving forward, but also to be able to transition and adjust much, much easier to life after the sport.
Yeah, I think we've heard enough examples of athletes that had that jarring experience of like when they retired and then like, what do I do? And then they're pretty outspoken about how they really struggled after their sport. But yeah, I mean, if you are building them up in other ways than just their sport, they're gonna be stronger. They're gonna be better for it. They're gonna be a better person, a better athlete, all around. And I think that's again, that's why that's why this combination of both of them is so important. And if you're able to be passionate in multiple areas, that's just that's just better, in my opinion. Because like I said, if the performance goes away, you retire, or with an injury, having other things that might not be able to generate as much passion as like being on a beam or being on in a gym mat or being on the rink or a track or wherever might not equal that, but you have to be able to diversify because that is not forever. And that's why I do a lot of purpose development in, sort of like for your sport, but also for you as a person, what drives that, what fuels you, that type of stuff. And I found good success with people being able to sort of like break that athlete
because for a lot of times these athletes had never considered themselves as a person outside of their role as athlete, because it's so all encompassing and it requires so much training and focus that it's been their entire lives, right? Often from like a very young age until the point where you start working with them. So I'd imagine like getting into that is really fascinating because it's like the first time they've ever even considered that. It's kind of like a wake up moment. Yeah,
and I think particularly with Simone Biles too, and Michael Phelps has been pretty outspoken about this too, but especially with Olympic athletes, where for most Olympic athletes, their like prime physical state is like 18 to 22, and then they're like done, right? And, some people can go a little bit longer, obviously, but then that's like the first quarter of your life, right? And that's like, well, now what do I do with the next 75, right? Exactly. Your brain, for guys that haven't brain developed yet. So that's why, I think that's another talking point for it, but that's why it's so important to be able to do both.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of mental fitness, we're going to get into maybe some of our mental fitness strategies that we personally use. And before we get to that, I think some of the advice I would kind of give to people kind of listening when it comes to how, what does mental fitness mean? How do you cultivate it? I think it is related to self-care. I think mental fitness is kind of a synonym for self-care. I think it maybe is even a little bit more proactive and a little bit more wide-ranging than just the self-care concept, but I think it's very similar and synonymous with that. And I think it's important when it comes to mental fitness that it's about, first of all, knowing your triggers and risks and planning accordingly, right? So you have to know yourself and know the things that, like we used that analogy earlier of kind of like emptying the bucket or filling the bucket. What are the things that are adding things to your life in a good way, and what are the things that aren't? And can you at least be aware of those things? You might not always be able to get rid of them, but can you be aware of those things? Because if your awareness is high, you can plan accordingly. For me personally, lack of sleep impacts my mood big time. So I know that that's a big trigger for me. If I'm not sleeping at least 8 hours a night or 7.5 to 8.5, my performance slips, my mood gets affected. Like that's something I know I have to keep in a good place, because otherwise it's going to leave me in a pretty vulnerable position. Not within a week, but gradually. If that happens for a while, it's definitely going to have an impact. You also want to know your warning signs. Like, what is your check engine light? For me, and this is, letting you behind the curtain a little bit for everyone listening, but for me, I know that when I start getting headaches pretty periodically, it means I'm pushing myself too hard, and I need to take my foot off the gas a little bit and focus on mental fitness a little bit more, self-care, give myself a break, that kind of thing. I know when my temper gets a little bit shorter, especially when I'm watching sports. I've noticed this. I take sports seriously. It's my way to tap into my emotion and let it out in a healthy way. And if I'm watching the Eastern Conference Finals and I'm mad at the refs, that's one thing. But in the seventh game of the season, if they're playing the 76ers and Joel Embiid is flopping around the court and I'm flipping out at my television, usually that's a sign that maybe I have to like look in the mirror and try to focus on my self-care a little bit, my mental fitness. Food is definitely another one. So I'm like kind of an emotional eater. So I know when I'm really stressed out, if I start like, kind of getting fast food instead of being more intentional, that's after a couple, if like that happens 2 days in a row, a light bulb goes off in my head and I'm like, okay, what's going on here? I need to like take a step back and focus on, my own mental fitness and doing some things proactively that are going to help me bring me to a better place. So being proactive when it comes to mental fitness is hard work, right? It's much easier for people to just not think about it, and then they have to be reactive when what hits the fan. So it is hard work, but it's worth it when it comes to mental fitness and things like that. You want to watch out for perfectionism, because you don't have to be perfect. Perfectionism itself can kind of be something that depletes your tank a little bit. So you want to be careful that when you're being proactive, you're also being kind to yourself and not expecting to hit every element of mental fitness perfectly. Because that's not going to help.
Right. And to this day, there's still zero examples of perfection anywhere and anything.
Never happened.
So, never happened. So just a friendly reminder.
Exactly. Exactly. So in terms of mental fitness strategies, we each have 10. We're going to go through 6 through 10 pretty quick and then just maybe focus on our top 5 a little bit. What's your 6 through 10, John?
Would be sleep, phone, removal of phone, getting rid of it. Sleep for sure. Nutrition's definitely a big one for me. Like eating healthy and stuff, like trying to eat healthy, minimizing sugar, especially that one definitely affects me. I get migraines, and so that definitely is a big piece for me. Exercise is a big one for me, and then like some family time and pieces like that. Those are sort of like the pretty important ones for me.
Absolutely. So my 10th one is meditation. I don't do great with it, but I try to do it as much as I can. I go in waves. Exercise is obviously really important. Watching sports, like I said, that's actually a great emotional release for me. And it's it's an activity that doesn't require a lot of thought, so I can just kind of relax my mind. Within reason, depends on the game and how the refs are doing. Social interaction is definitely a big one for me. I'm not an extrovert, but I'm not an introvert either. I'm kind of more of like an ambivert in the middle, so I need periodic social interaction. And walking my dog is a big one for me too. It didn't quite crack the top 5. No offense to my dog. He'd be pissed if he heard this, but walking my dog is definitely important for me. So what is your, let's go maybe one at a time for top 5.
I'd say for me, I guess I'm definitely more up towards like the introverted or the extroverted side. Definitely that's a little bit more bubbly. I get a lot of energy from stuff like that, but I also need like solitude. Like I know that I need that for myself because I can get overstimulated. So solitude is like one of the most important things for me.
That's a great one.
Like,
I wish I put that on mine.
Be just by myself.
Yeah.
We spend all day, most of our days listening to people, helping people and stuff like that. And if I don't take time to just remove myself from everything, it builds. And then, I get overwhelmed, I get anxious, I get stressed, my heart rate goes crazy and all that stuff. And so I try not to do that. And I even have solitude like from my family, which is also part of my top 5, but I need to have that separation moments and find times. It's not, I don't take like weekend long trips by myself. It's like like an hour once in a while, but that's definitely one of the ones that's really important for me. Like that's just solitude.
Yeah, that's a great one. I wish I'd put that on my top 10 because I do the same thing where it's like, spending time with family is so important, but spending time with yourself is really key. And I actually think it's a sign of someone who really cares about themselves, because I think that, when people are low in confidence or they're prone to anxiety, they tend to struggle being alone, without the distractions, or they don't think that they're good enough and they need someone around them. So I think it's a skill to be able to do solitude. So that's a great one. For me, my 5th one is learning. For me, continuing to learn makes me feel like I always have positive momentum in my life. It keeps me humble. The more I learn, the more I realize how little I know. It's kind of a weird catch-22 with that.
Sure.
And it also builds optimism for me. And the more I learn about stuff, the more excited I get about being a human, the more excited I get about living. It makes me want to get creative. It makes me want to have ideas. And, 9 out of every 10 ideas suck and don't end up working out, but one ends up being good. And I think that keeps me going. So learning is a big one for me. What's the next one for you?
Yeah, similar. Mine was reading. Yep. So it was that has not been something that's been in my life until probably the last 5 years or so. I was not a reader growing up. I hated it. But I had a lot of hard time struggling to like focus on it. So that was why I just didn't do it. But the same reason, I'll read something and I get like psyched up, energized, sort of refocused. It kind of helps me like sort of bring myself down a little bit, but contribute to, helping people. I think it always kind of helps with that. So reading for me for sure is on that list.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think my next one is, talking to myself and to my wife, and this kind of relates to the solitude thing, because like I do watch how I talk to myself, and I'm intentional about that. And so it's not like I'm having this multiple personality conversation in my head, but it's like you have that critic, right? And I think I try to befriend the critic a little bit, keep it in a good place, understand the role it has, because it is important, it is helpful in a lot of ways. But I try to be like my own best coach and be forgiving to myself. And I think especially when there's solitude, that's what I'm looking for, is like, how am I talking to myself? How am I treating myself? And then obviously, having a person, whether it's, a spouse or a best friend or that kind of thing, family member, for me, that's my wife. That's someone I confide everything in. And I need that because I know, not one, it's good to get that stuff out with someone you trust, because it's just like, in a way, it's like a therapist, right? It's about getting it out, hearing yourself talk, releasing that emotion. But for me, I think what makes it important is that I know she's always going to tell me exactly how it is. She doesn't pull punches. I love that because I know that there's no fakeness. There's no worrying about, am I getting the real deal? She's going to tell me exactly what she thinks, and she knows me really well. I think that helps me keep myself in check in a lot of good ways because it provides a balance. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
What's your next one?
Exercise for me.
Okay.
That's key. Like you'd mentioned with sleep, like if I don't exercise on a consistent basis, I noticed I start to, it impacts everything. My sleep goes to shit. I start eating like shit, more sugar. If I don't stay on top of that, I don't do well. It's kind of like my access back to my old days when I was doing more of that. So it provides of like just pure joy, like reminds me of the joy that I got from running. But also it's just me knowing that I'm taking care of myself. You know, I think a lot of times when I hear this, a little tangent, but I promise I'll move on quickly. But when I hear people talk about exercise, I think that the main focus is like, well, I want to look good. I want to do this. Totally. I want to work on this. I want to get rid of these love handles. I want to get bigger arms. I want to get bigger legs. And, you know, I absolutely fall into that same pattern every once in a while, being like, oh man, like I'll catch my glimpse of myself in the mirror and be like, ooh, got to work on that. And then I have to be like, no, John, you need to work on thinking about it like that.
Yes.
And taking that next step of like, I train to feel good. I don't train to look good. And I really, really try to focus on that. Some days are better than others. But that's why exercise is not only just it's good for myself, but it's a really good mental training exercise for me, because the way that I look was and continues to sort of be a lingering insecurity. And it's a really, really good technique and strategy for me to keep that in check and really stay focused on why, like the true importance of exercising. So that's a big one for me.
That's amazing because to me that touches on a key component that we work on with clients a lot, and I think is really helpful for people listening, is that your brain is going to have some neurons firing that cause it to think some things without your control. You don't have to listen to it. And I think if you know yourself well enough, you know what's healthy, you'll catch that. Because that's an example. It's like your brain's going to fire off like, oh, I want to look better, or that's not good enough, or I need a six-pack, or that kind of thing. And the goal is not to turn that off. Like that's going to happen no matter what you do. Again, perfectionism is not possible. So your brain's going to have some thoughts that are not helpful. It's when that happens, if you know yourself and you can catch it, use that as fuel, shift it in the right direction that's healthy for you, and then you can kind of acclimate.
Exactly.
My third one is purpose in life. I think, you know, tying into much larger goals that have nothing to do with me in terms of what we want to do, you know, from a business perspective and help the most people possible. Like that keeps me going. That's like fuel for me because it has nothing to do with me. It's about trying to help a lot of people and achieve something that's meaningful beyond ourselves. And I think that's something that continuously keeps me motivated and helps me kind of stave off burnout and stuff because I love what we do. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a really good one.
What's your second one?
Journaling and breath training, kind of in conjunction. Those are sort of the two that I really prioritize, and I know that I have to be very, very diligent about doing it because it's one of those ones that like I have a hard time with being like, oh, I don't have time for that, or I got to do this, I got to do that. And I'll those are usually the first two to go when I start getting really busy, which is why they're the first two that I need to spend the most time thinking about, because those are like the gateway to becoming overwhelmed and and having too much go time. If those two start to not become a part of my everyday practice, so those are kind of like my immediate red flags. Those are like the two that I see that are like really important because they're really informative to me of like the scales are tipping too much into the overwhelmed state if you're not able to like wake up, even 10 breaths and journal down, here's what I want to get done today, here's what I've already done today, here's why I love myself, and boom, if I don't do that practice and I'm already waking up in an anxious state and like go, I know that that's a problem. So those are and those two happen in conjunction with one another, but that's one of my most important ones.
Okay, yeah, that's a great one. My second to last one is or number two, right? About to get to number one, which is my top one. But my second one is sleep hygiene. Like I said earlier, that's to me it's non-negotiable. It has to be the priority in my life on a consistent basis. I think that started with having the opposite in architecture school. When I was architecture school was like med school. It's like they just pump you full of this like false BS where they basically if you're sleeping you're not trying kind of thing, and it's such crap. But like that's what they do to try to motivate you. And I bought into it because I was young and stupid. And it led to a lot of all-nighters, and the effect of that is something that probably took years off the end of my life, if I'm being honest. I mean, it really had a negative impact on my mental health, my well-being. And yet it also kind of helped me recognize, like, post architecture school, that's not how I want to do it. I had to switch up my approach. So sleep hygiene, focusing on at least 8 hours a night is really key for me. What's your final one, top one?
My family.
Yeah.
I really do. I mean, maybe it sounds corny and cheesy, but it really is where I get the most joy. And it is the spending time with them puts everything into perspective for me. Even on the hard days when my daughter's not listening.
Or your son throws a car at your head.
Or a son throws a car at my head. He just wants to be a wrestler right now. So, even on those times where I'm like losing my mind, or it's 3 a.m. and my son won't go back to bed, or like even in those moments like that, that are certainly hard, that's why I do it. I do it for my family. I do it for, that's part of the purpose of why I'm doing all this different stuff. And they really kind of help keep me grounded. And my spouse particularly, kind of same as true, will like call it as it is, right? You're being, this is ridiculous, or slow down, or all this different stuff. And so it's the most important. And if I notice like the time's not, I think there's different times where I'll spend more time with family, more time with business, finding the balance, ongoing process for sure. But having that stability and that peace in there, is that work to put into having that, is the best thing for me.
Absolutely. That's a great one. My number one is travel. And I think it kind of is synonymous with family, because it's travel with my wife, because I can't, when we go places, one, it's a way that her and I connect that, it's hard to do when we have our everyday work life around here, because there is no stress, there's no distraction, there's just us being present with each other and experiencing something together, and seeing new places is really cool. And for me, it's also a key thing for mental fitness, because it keeps me grounded and it divides up the stress. I think that's where 2020 was really hard for me, because we couldn't travel. And we're used to going abroad. We're used to going different places. Like once every 3 months, we go for like 5 to 7 days somewhere. And we find out little ways in between to visit family and stuff. But we travel somewhere on a plane, we disconnect. And for me, that's a huge reset. Like I am always able to get a bird's eye view perspective. We talk a lot about stepping back from the painting. Travel helps me do that. Every 3 months, I leave. We go on a vacation somewhere. We explore things. I step back, and I have a much more clear perspective about where I'm at with my mental health and my mental fitness, what I need to change. So on a personal level, I get that perspective. And then on a business level, I get it too. I start to see things from a much more bird's eye view, and I can make sense of stuff that when you're so close to the day-to-day, it's hard to kind of make sense. Right. Things blur together, and you just lose things sometimes. So I'm looking forward to that. We got a trip planned in a couple months, and it's been over a year, so I'm like itching for that. So that's my number one, is travel. So that is it for the Simone Biles Mental Fitness episode. Just one reminder to listeners, if you can subscribe on YouTube to our channel, you can search on YouTube the Grim Drive Podcast. We are stuck on 78, Johnny, and I'm pretty sure we only got from 76 to 78 because of Dimitri over here. So we appreciate that, him taking pity on us. If we can get to 100, we can get our own custom URL, which would be great. I also want to encourage people to listen to this new podcast that's out. It's called We're All a Little Crazy. Yeah. It's a podcast by Theo Fleury, who's a former hockey player, Darren Ravel, and Eric Cussin, who started the Same Here global mental health movement. Which, we've talked to him, and he, the mission that they're doing at Same Here is really, really cool and really important. We encourage everyone to check out Same Here, hashtag Same Here. Check out We're All a Little Crazy podcast. They're going to get into some really cool mental health topics that I think people would find interesting. As always, a reminder that all the helpful information and links we've described can be accessed in the show notes and on our website at grimdrive.com. Thanks for listening to this Grim Drive podcast discussion on Simone Biles and mental fitness. We'll be back next week to talk about Shamika Holdsclaw and adjustment.
Thanks, everyone.